Kubota B21. We got a little oil leak. A little rig gear, keep the tire clean. Tilt the axle while in storage. This needs to be fixed. Okay, wheel and tire off. Jack stand. Safety first. Now all this dirt, we're going to have to clean everything really good. High tolerance bearings and stuff will be exposed. You don't want any grit going in any of it. So real good cleaning. It's that seal we're after. Now do a chintz out, not to this other seal. Notice a couple studs came out. So flat washer, lock washer, nut. I'm sure that's okay. Oil drain plug back here. Washer's still on it. Make sure it doesn't drop in your pan. Removing the tie rod end. We have here a Pitman arm puller. And I back the castle nut off after removing the cotter pin and leave a little airspace under the castle nut by having it on there far enough with a little washer to protect the nut. And it's the softest way to release that without jarring the whole system. The other alternative is to get one of these here big lump hammers. And I don't like doing this, although I've done it on many other things years ago, and just strike this area to that taper and releases. Not my favorite choice if I can go with this. So at your own risk. Now after removing all the bolts, leaving two in, one on the top, one on the bottom, just in a couple threads to catch this thing when it starts to move. The issue here is there's no pry points to get this far, to get it started. This baby's ready to come off, but what I had to do is the casting is such that the lip overhangs just a little bit. I wouldn't go driving a chisel straight in, but what I did is I had this nice wide face, about 2 inches wide, and I did a nice fresh grind on it so it had nice square corners, square edges. Then I came in at an angle such as that to get it started. Alright, just enough to catch that lip, and there was a little bit more of a lip on the back side here to get it started. That actually worked out pretty good, but again, the same thing, a shallow angle. We're not driving a wedge between the pieces. We're trying to get the piece driven outward. Don't want to mar up the machine surface where it seals. Now, when you go to remove this, there may be a thrust or a shim that might fall out. Just be aware and find a nice clean place to put this. There's a big ring gear, oil soaked on the back. So here we go. Okay, this is where we are now. This is the assembly that came off. Now, as I was pulling that off, the drive hub flange started to come out. And one video I referenced before pulling this apart, this thing would come apart as one piece. In fact, the bearing, which is still in there, which is loose in nature, slides right out. There's no shim behind it. Orient it the same way. Put it on that piece. Okay. One hiccup. Before the thing was all the way off, something fell out and went in the oil pan. I was able to retrieve it with the magnet. It looks like a half of a I don't know what you call it, but where that actually goes, the other half of it is behind this bevel gear. Okay, and that's the retainer to keep the hub flange from falling out, keeping your wheel in place. And then the ring gear, it's your fact of just existing in there is what keeps those two halves from coming out. So as I was pulling it apart, things started to separate, and then one of those retainer halves fell out. The other half is probably either in here or still in place. So what I'll do is we'll take a look at that next before we go any further. And after that, we pop that loose tie rod out, and then we go after a snap ring above that gear. On the very top of that cavity there is a snap ring. You gotta go in there, and then this whole thing will drop downward in a vertical downward motion. But let's first investigate where that other retainer half is. Okay, that big bevel gear just slides right off. That's that same bearing. I laid that out so the orientation will go on the same way it came off. And there's the other retainer half. Okay, so there's a slot in this stub shaft down by where the bearing is. I don't know if you can see it. Each half fits on each side. Okay, you just install those, lay them there, and then when you put this bevel gear on, that machined out surface and step holds those two halves together. Okay, and when we're coming apart, the gear must have slid off a little bit, and then that piece dropped out. So assembly, you're going to have to be very careful, make sure all that stays together and that doesn't drop out. Alright, but basically this is how this is going to go. There's one half installed, and then the other half is on the other side. Now, my OCD says these are stamped in one direction. There's like one sharp side and then one slightly rounded side. I would probably put the sharp side up. That's going to give it better holding power. Alright, it's these little details when you're into this sort of thing that may make a difference. So even like washers have a stamped side. When I used to work in marine service, anytime we put a washer against a painted surface, we would put the rounded side against the painted surface. Alright, this is where the detail is. This is important. Make sure you get this correct. Put this assembly back together so you don't have any problems. Alright, good luck with that. Snap rings off. Good quality snap ring pliers required for that one. Now this thing's not dropping off. After that snap ring's off, that whole assembly should drop off. Well, it's off. I was really second guessing myself, pulling that circlip off on the bottom. Is there something else holding this thing? And a couple phone calls at various dealers, scouring all the other YouTube videos. Everybody says it drops right off. Then the one dealer says, get mad at it. Sometimes you have to. I says, with fire? He goes, if you have to, you're putting new seals in anyway. Oh, all that work, that's what I'm after, that guy there. So I put the bucket under here to catch it. Kind of worked. And a bungee on it. So after all that beating, my poor wrist is done. Okay, so this seal came out with the traditional seal puller. That worked well. Oh, I'm debating on going after these bearings since I put some heat on them. I didn't turn them red, but I got a feeling that maybe I should just check in the bearing supply house and see if I can get those cheap. One seal remains. It's the other half, the inner half. I think we're going to have to work that off crudely with a screwdriver. We will see. The screwdriver trick is working. There it goes. So it's the seal surface, the shiny part on the bottom, that the mating part in the knuckle will ride on to seal. Do a thorough inspection, cleaning cracks where the seal just came off. Make sure there's no rust. If there is, get some emery cloth, clean it up. And I probably would put some silicone on with the new seal. So we decided to go after the bearings and change them out. After the beating this casting took to get this thing apart and separated from the spindle, those inner races of bearings were really stuck to that spindle. I had to use heat and just got a bad feeling about putting it back together with the same bearings after the abuse they took. So they're out, laid aside. Big one is the upper, the smaller one is the lower. So to remove the upper, a conventional slide hammer made that job very easy. It's just not real tight in there, just a nice snug fit that came right out. And then way in there is a snap ring you have to go after. So there's a snap ring and a tool that's probably a bit overkill for that, but standard little snap ring pliers will not do it. I tried that, so this actually made it very easy. Once that snap ring's out, the bearing sits nestled way down the bottom of the cavity, way in there, way in there. Okay, so that comes out. That allows you to then get this out of the way. I have the pinion shaft out that sits in the center of all that. Before the new bearing goes in the bottom of the cavity, that has to go back in. And that snap ring on there, make sure that's in place, because that's the one that holds the whole gig together when you put it back on a tractor and keeps the knuckle from dropping off. Okay, so again, that's from the abuse getting this thing off is why I'm changing those bearings. So now that these bearings are out of that steering knuckle, I am going to take some time to try and fit these on the spindle a little better. I don't think they're supposed to be pressed on. It's so violent to get this thing apart. This is another reason why I want to change these bearings. You're not really supposed to hammer on bearings in particular directions. Depends on where you're hammering. So if this race is stuck and this thing's in a housing and you're hammering the housing, all that force is transmitting through the ball bearings in there. So I will probably work this so that this is a little bit more of a slip fit, maybe not a total slip fit, and then check the upper one as well. Maybe some light tapping. I'll do that with the old bearings, and then when we get the new ones, just confirm and then install them in the assembly. So to change the seal behind the drive flange, that gear lifts right off, and there's two keepers, and the drive flange will then slide out. That bearing there that you see is actually just laid there. That came out of the housing behind me. I'll show you that in a second. And there will be two shims. This lays in the housing, and then the drive flange goes in from the outside. So the inside of the housing, that's where that bearing sits in those two shims. That seal that came out from this side. Okay, and I just hung it over the edge of the bench, and I used that socket to drive that seal out. The seal has a flange on it. The flange is on the outside of the machine. You can see the dirt. That's the side that the stub shaft and the drive flange goes in. That concludes the disassembly. Part 2 will be reassembly.